Welcome to EPG Pathshala. I'm Swati Biswas from the Department of Islamic History and Culture, University of Calcutta. Today we are going to discuss from the paper Art and Architecture of India, the module The Growth of Local Style and the Dominance of Rajput Painting from 1660 to 1750. In this module, we will discuss how this Mughal style fizzled out in the local courts of the Rajputs all over Western India, Central India, northwest of the subcontinent. The styles developed over centuries, and the Mughal artists and other artisans, after losing jobs in the Mughal atelier, moved to the Rajput courts and enhanced the school. The schools, after going through their evolutionary phase, developed its own iconographic features with some overlap, which was always the marked feature of this school. Now let us introduce the module. We know that the Mughal school started in the 16th century and continued up to the end of the 17th century. Though of course the Mughal atelier was not officially fizzled out, but the importance of it somehow dwindled with the political sway. The artists and the artisans who were attached to the Mughal court obviously moved out of the Mughal court for new work. The political situation also changed. The central politics somehow became weak, and the local powers started growing their importance, and the regional identity somehow became strong. And local powers started dominating in the regions of Western India, Central India, Eastern India, and certain parts of Northern India also. Obviously, these courts started imitating the culture that was dominant in the Mughals, because they also served the Mughals in some way or the other. So thus, painting became one of the passions of all these courts. To them, political power and prowess also had developed a kind of a political culture in which painting was an essential part. Therefore, the schools developed with the regional identity along with the technique and the speciality of the Mughals. So it was becoming an admixture of the local schools or the evolutionary local painting styles mingle somehow with the Mughal styles to give these local painting schools a kind of identity. In the last decades of the 16th century, Rajput painting therefore began to develop distinctly, combining indigenous as well as the influences of Persian, Mughal, Chinese, European into an unique style. The full-fledged Rajasthani school did not develop in a short period, but evolved after much overlap and considerations. The four principal schools of Rajput are the Mewar school, which contains the Shavand, Nathwada, Devgarh, Udaipur, and the Sawar school. The Marwar school includes Kishangarh, Bikaner, Jodhpur, Nagaur, Pali, Ghanerao. The Haduti school, of course, continued with the Kota, Bundi, and the Jhalawar style. The Dhundar school comprised the Amber, Jaipur, Shekhawati, and Uniara styles of painting. Rajasthani school of painting, which developed in the northwestern part of India in this late 16th and 17th century, was not necessarily confined within the geographical boundaries of present-day Rajasthan. The trend continued from the pre-Mughal times. Now, we have to understand that the Rajput clans were dispersed in Western India, certain parts of Central India, and in the Punjab hills. Now, they served in some capacity or the other to the Mughals. But after the Mughals became weak as a power, they declared their independence, or at least semi-independence. And it is these courts where the Rajput school flourished. But of course, these schools utilized the local painters mostly who continued with the pre-Mughal style. Added to these artists came the Mughal artists who combined certain elements of Mughal, Persian, and European technique in these schools. It made its influence felt both in Gujarat and therefore parts of Jammu and Punjab. Dinesh Chandra Sen says that the eastern extension of Rajasthani school is found in the 17th century Orison book cover painting. The early remains of these paintings are found in the 16th century Western Indian style of painting, more precisely known as Chaurapanchashika style that we have discussed in the other module. The illustrated manuscript depicting the love story of Bilhan and Champavati is one of the most important sources to understand the evolution of Rajasthani school of painting. The treatment of the human body and figure as represented in these paintings later on became the conventions of Rajasthani school. Apart from these Western Indian painting, the Mughal paintings which developed in the courts of Akbar and Jahangir had also a deep impact behind the evolution of Rajasthani school. The Mughal school and Western Indian school, along with the folk traditions of Rajasthan, helped in the evolution of a unique art form which assumed a concrete shape not before 17th century. So before that, what we can say, a big evolutionary period was there for the different Rajasthani schools. Being stretched over a vast geographical area, the Rajasthani school itself had its own difference. Now let us move into the themes in Rajput painting. We have to understand the Rajputs were essentially Hindu rulers. So therefore, there is a dominance of the Hindu themes. But of course, we see that secular themes also was important as the local storytelling community and the culture of storytelling remained very, very popular all over India, which included the secular culture. Until the 18th century, the Rajput local rulers continued in the local style evolved through indigenous pre-Mughal painting style and then influenced by the Mughal court artist. Ragamalas, along with the story related to Krishna, was the main subject of these paintings. Bhagavad Puran was the main inspiration of these painting styles. The Vaishnava culture or Vaishnavism as part of the Bhakti culture was very, very popular in Western India. So the Vaishnava influence somehow was deep rooted in the society of the Rajput clans, and obviously the story of Krishna was popular among the common man and also among the elite. The standards Ragamala is a set of 36 paintings depicting the man-woman relationship during different time of the day and the season. Now, this kind of Ragamalas became again the essential theme, secular theme of the Rajput painters. Each of these is considered as a separate raga or its variant Ragini. They essentially depict the emotional potential of the man-woman relationship. Nature in these paintings were used to intensify the situation and not merely as special backdrops. So nature essentially became the symbols within the limited scope of the artist. So different season depicted or rather enhanced certain rags or raginis, and those became the essential themes of the painting school. The different painting schools specialized in different rags and raginis, which we will discuss later. Ragamala is a part of a devotional bhakti, which is as a philosophy was much popular in these areas, and it was a kind of a rebellion against the Brahminical cult. The worshipper here longs for communion with the god through music and other forms of entertainment like dance, which was not approved much in the conventional norms of religion. Now, these kind of bhakti emancipation we have seen in many of the saints of the period during this time, especially Mirabai, whose life was very popular among the Rajput clans. It deviated from the priestly control of religion. This definitely was much patronized by the local courts, keeping in mood with the then popular notions of the society. The second facet of Rajput painting is pristine Vaishnavism. The incarnation of Vishnu, Krishna, in the form of male protagonist was the theme of many Rajput paintings. The non-Vaishnavite subject of Bhakti intermingled with the Vaishnava subject of Krishna in the illustration formats, making it a more complex issue. Krishna becomes the epitome of sensuousness and the archetypal beloved. Now, this sensuous component is an essential part of the Rajput painting styles. Now, let's move to the regional variations of these paintings. Many Rajasthan states developed distinctive local artistic traditions. Different courts in the same geographical area usually shared the general trends. Now, for example, the Sirohi and Mewar had much in common, as did Bikaner and Jodhpur because of the proximity. Thus, a broad regional type developed, within which we have the smaller schools. Mewar school was much in common also with the Malwa painting, as Malwa was in the southwest of Mewar and it had certain commonality with Sirohi school in the west. Now, we know the pre-Mughal Malwa school was very popular and we have discussed it distinctly in a different module. Now, that tradition of painting continued locally and these local artists were then incorporated either into the Sirohi school or the Mewar school for that matter. Mewar and its neighbors and Rathore states of Jodhpur and Bikaner were the two extremes in the range of Rajput style during the later years of 17th century. The differences depended on the variants of the Mughal style. Now, it always was that the Mughals had certain amount of relationship with these schools. It had maximum relationship with the Marwars group of provinces and less relationship with Mewar. So, obviously, the impact of the Mughals felt in these courts were different. Now, let's move to a very interesting group of Rajput paintings, the Sirohis. Sirohi is in the southwest corner which borders Gujarat and Mewar, developed a distinct style, usually it is said from the last quarter of the 17th century. This style is distinctly depicted the Sarang Ragini series. The Mughal influence is much less and the form is crisp and clean in depiction. So, the archaic patterns of the Mughal school was not there, but of course they used the trend of motion in the Mughal school. Of course, the concept of movement was not only arrested in the Mughal school and became popular, as we have discussed earlier, in the pre-Mughal style. The architecture is freely drawn and not geometric as we see in the Mughal painting style. The color is vibrant and the depiction overall is very, very spontaneous. The color emphasis is red, blue, green, white and saffron yellow like the pre-Mughal Bhagavad Purana series. The figures are modeled by shading along the outlines. Now, this was also a technique that we have seen being developed in the pre-Mughal period. This does not give any three-dimensional effect and thus is much vivid. The image is powerful and does not deal with any illusion. It continued till the 1740s and patronized by both Jains and Hindus. The Sirohi school is a useful example of the problems continually encountered in attempting to assign provenance to some recognizable Rajasthani styles. There is no evidence to connect the Sarang Ragamala to Sirohi though, but it is not known why Sarang Ragamala became so popular in this school. Now there is an overlap of this school with Mewar and make it very difficult to distinguish at least the early paintings of this school. One of the paintings of this school mentioned the capital of the Sirohis as Vasantgarh, and thus this conclusion was drawn that somehow Sarang was popular in this area. The closest parallel of the school can be found in the inscribed paintings from Nadol, Desuri and Bijapur. Now let's move to Malwa. Malwa paintings have architectural similarity with the paintings from Sirohi because of the close proximity. The Ragamalas of Malwa has different interpretation compared to that of Sirohi. Malwa subjects are more detailed. The reason can be that the pre-Mughal style already was prevalent there in Malwa, and we have a big group of artistic endeavors growing before the advent of the Mughals, which continued even in the 17th century. The spatial sophistication deteriorated, of course, with time in these series. The architecture, foliage and textile is more detailed, and this is a kind of texture that we see that they have imbibed from the Mughals. It has more Mughal influence, therefore, as far as detailing is concerned. The dress code of this school is also has Mughal influence. The reason can be because the political influence of the Mughals were more in these areas, and the ruling elite always imitated the Mughal elites, and therefore the dress code remained the same. Now let's move to another very interesting group of paintings, Bundi and Kota. Bundi and Kota were bordered by Malwa to the south and Mewar in the west. Thus the Ragamalas were in close proximity with the Ragamalas of Mewar, Sirohi and Malwa. By 1680, Bundi style moved a century and a very distinct and mature style evolved. The Ragamalas used at times identical compositions from Chunar Ragamala of 1591. Kamud Ragini patterns of this series over time also became very, very unique. Now the prototypes had some compositions but of course had different effect. The painters in many cases copied the model literally without knowing the forms presented to him. Now this is something very common to all the Mughal and all the medieval school. The painters could copy painting very well, but in the methodology they lacked that method, and therefore the technique differed. So the picture looked almost the same, but the technique obviously became different. So this is also a struck feature of the medieval, which we find in the Bundi and the Kota paintings, or at least those paintings which were copied. Over the years, the Mughal influence diminished in this style. The special concept of Mughals were imitated earlier, and later this was removed. Interest in naturalism obviously was lessened. Naturalism was one of the main aspects of Mughal painting, but of course now in Bundi and Kota the themes became so important, obviously naturalism receded to the back. The style thus reverted back to the recognizable and established Rajput forms. The difference is also observed in the famous 17th century Ramayana series to the Ramayana compared to 1628. The Ragamala 1628 has more Mughal influence compared to the 1649 Ramayana series. The Kota artist of 17th century did not fancy any European work, leave apart their techniques. So therefore the color composition, the themes was never found in the painting styles of any Rajput painting, but mostly in Bundi and Kota there were exceptional aversion to European painting styles. European modeling or the technique of recession for them was never important. Thus, it has more similarity with the pre-Mughal style of painting. Vasanta Raga was a theme very popular in this school. The Kota group produced many such work with intense color composition. The tonality was much different from the mood of 17th century Mughal work. Maharaja Jagat Singh was the greatest patron of his time, and we see that many paintings revolved around the life of Maharaja Jagat Singh. Kota artists were popular for linearity. Of course, this is something again that as a tradition they took from the pre-Mughals. Now let's move again to another interesting group of painting styles from Jodhpur. The Rajput of Jodhpur were essentially Rathors. Original work of early Jodhpur is very rare. Interestingly, the paintings of nearby Bikaner are more in number. The reason for this is not known. We have to understand that Bikaner has contemporary documentation of its painting. It branched out from the Jodhpur group and is non-amicable relation most of the time, but of course they had the similar type of cultural patterns because they were all Rathors. It was close to the Mughals politically, and thus the influence of the Mughal school would be high on this group of painting. Use of space, diminutive figures of women, rich textile and well laid out architecture like the Mughals was the main trend. Among Rajasthani schools, Bikaner painting remained closest to the Mughal style for the longest period of time, and intentionally they did not want to come out of that style because it somehow suited the patrons. The evolution of the school has not been studied, of course, elaborately because as we have said that it's apart from the Bikaneri school, the original Jodhpur painting style, the earlier ones are not much in number. Mid-17th century works have stark similarity with the Mughal painting. The best part of this school is its fascination for documenting the names of the artist, his family lineage and date. This attitude, of course, was developed by the Mughals later also at the same time, that is 17th century. Now let's move to another school of Rajasthani painting which has gained much in international popularity, that is the Mewar painting school. Mewar school had enough inspiration to be sure of the broad outlines of its idiom. Mewar was one of the most important centers of Rajasthani painting. From 17th century onwards, the influence of the Mughal school becomes very clear in these paintings. Mughal influence was especially felt in the depiction of human body and their costume, and also sometimes they imitated the movements that were there in the Mughal school. The architectural representations are very simple and there is no use of light and shade, which is often used in European paintings to create the three-dimensional effects. We have to understand that the Rajput painting style actually intentionally avoided the European skill. Now, the reason can be that the artist who moved to these schools favored their own indigenous technique and somehow did not appreciate the European techniques. And the European techniques would otherwise somehow would pressure to the local techniques, and the local techniques or the local look would have relegated to the back. Since these courts wanted to keep the regional identity intact, they always stuck to the techniques that were indigenous, or at least those which came from Delhi, that is the Mughals. Architecture are mostly done in Mewar in the geometric pattern for covering backgrounds of the painting. So these had certain spatial purposes. They did not enhance the mood. Most of the time, Nayak and Nayika Bheda is very clear. Though the female figures are mostly same, the difference is shown through body color. So body color actually indicated the class that the subjects belonged to. On the other hand, the use of vibrant colors, one beside the other, makes it very different from Mughal painting. So Mughal cohesion of colors is absent here. One of the renowned artists of this school was Shadabin. Two illustrated manuscripts of Bhagavad Puran and a Ragamala series is signed by this popular artist. This state was ruled by the family of the Kachawas, and Man Singh, the famous commander in Mughal court, came from this family. Here also the paintings had a close relation with the Mughal school because of the proximity with the Mughal masters. Professor Ratnabuli Chatterjee, who specializes in this painting school, says that in the paintings of Ambar and then the Naikas were very close to the attendants of the Mariam-uz-Zamani in the fort of Fatehpur Sikri. Though the treatments of human figures were same as that of the Mughal school, their execution became different. The paintings did not become mere copy of the Mughal school because intentionally they wanted to keep the flavor of the local artist and the local culture. So initially the Mughal school influenced this school, of course, like all other schools, but they started to moving away from the Mughal reality very fast. With the passage of time, therefore, apart from the enhancement of the Mughal influence, certain developments also occurred in Jaipur school itself, such as vibrant colors were no longer used, bold lines were replaced by the finer ones, and the composition also became more and more complex. Now, let's move to another interesting group of paintings from the hills of Punjab, which is also clubbed within the Rajput paintings. It is this school which later became part of the Pahari school. To the north of Rajasthan, of course, in the Punjab hills, in the foothills of the Himalayas, was a cluster of 35 princely states which were controlled by the Rajput clans. The landscape is much wild and dramatic. The artists of this region created some of the most powerful and expressive landscapes in Indian painting because they themselves lived in landscapes which were very unique. The influence of the other schools in this school felt much less, and they continued with their pre-Mughal style. No dated illustration, of course, before 1660 is found, though the regional artists, as we can understand, worked much before that. The famous Rashamanjari, a 14th century Sanskrit text by Bhanudatta, is found from this area, dated 1660. This is a painting from the Basoli group. The illustrations are essentially metaphoric. The second related work is the depiction of the famous Bhadrakali worshipped by Brahma, Vishnu and Shiva. The compositions are an assemblage of compartments in flat plane of brilliant color. The figures are angular and the gestures are much clearer with intense expressions with large head and big eyes. It has an instant impact. The exact place of the origin is not known though. but it is a continuation of the pre-Mughal painting style. We have found the painting styles of the Devi Mahatma series in the pre-Mughal stages also, which were very close to the Bhadrakali series. Now let's move to another school which developed much late, the Kishangarhs. The Kishangarh school stands very different in taste and preference. In spite of being closely related to the Mughal school, the treatments of the human figures are very different. Here, the Nayaka and the Nayika reminds us of the human attires mentioned in the classical Sanskrit literature of Kalidas and Bhava Bhuvati. The subjects of these paintings are mostly borrowed from the Vaishnava literature such as Krishna Leela and Rasa Leela. The backgrounds of these paintings are usually dominated by large trees gradually becoming very smaller in size with their movement towards the horizon in the process, giving a sense of perspective which is very unusual in Indian miniature painting. But we have to understand this concept of perspective is very different from the typical European style that we have seen being imitated in the Mughal painting style. The figures are in constant motion, which makes the story much livelier. One of the important artists of this school is Nihal Chand, who was popular for his recession depictions. Portraiture in Rajput painting is an important aspect because the Mughal portraiture culture was very popular among the elites of the medieval North India. Now, they have seen the Mughals masters creating these exotic portraitures. So, the patrons of these local houses also wanted their portraiture to be depicted by the artists. The chance for making idiom was strong as the subject matter was religious in these painting styles. So, therefore, pristine portraitures are very interestingly drawn. The new subjects force the artist to become inventive, and we see again a case of this portraiture culture. It developed, therefore, as an imitation of the Mughals. Maharaja Jagat Singh of Kota's portraiture is an imitation of Jahangir. The portraits were meticulously planned and at times very spontaneous. Kota school was also popular for their spontaneous portraiture. The impact of the Rajput skill is its vividness and direct impact. The sophistication is attained by the finesse of the individual artist, of course, like any other painting. This is true for all schools. Now let's move at the end of this module, that is how these painting schools developed in the late 17th and early 18th century Rajasthani paintings. Now, by the late 17th and early 18th century, the Mughal power and prestige has started to decline both politically and economically. Taking advantage of this situation, regional powers, especially the high-ranking mansabdars, started to curb out their independent sphere of interest. In order to establish their dominance in their perspective local, they replicated the Mughal etiquette. Thus, we find that by 1700, all the Rajput palaces contained gardens, courtyards, darbar halls in the Mughal fashion. So, what happened was by 18th century, these local houses were actually becoming so powerful that they now had to could cut off all relation with the Mughals. But of course, Mughal culture was steeped deep in this whole ambience. Even in matters of painting, therefore, the painters use finger pigments now, and the paints the natural world and more experimental style started. Apart from this superficial appearance, neither the architecture nor the painters working for Rajput patrons adopted anything more. And this difference of taste and preference becomes much clearer in the treatment of space. Mughal artists always tried to make the sense of spatial depth by creating an empty space, though not at par with the European taste. But of course, it was done in Mughal fashion, where Hindu artists working for the Hindu patrons sought to show instead the inseparability of forms and found it more effective to use a less scientific space, even to deny the concept of empty space. The use of compartments in the painting of Mewar shows the vigor of the pre-Mughal traditions in Mewar and intensification of it with greater refinement of perception and technique. In the Principality of Kota, further experimentation was done in the 18th century. Here, the painting becomes much larger than the traditional miniature style. Size was increased not to increase the quality and quantity of detailing, but because to reflect the dynamism and energy of the painting. Of course, this dynamism and energy is very different from the first Mughal project of Hamzanama that we have discussed in the other module. This dynamism and energy was very unique now to the Rajput painting style, especially that from Kota. It remained packed with descriptive details both of the action and of the landscape. The artist now becomes more rough and avoids the detail. In the beginning of the 18th century, when the Rajasthani school of Mewar and Bundi were trying to come out of the clutches of the Mughal school and trying to establish its own identity, Kishangarh still followed the 17th century Mughal school. So the evolution of the schools did not have the same story. The dating were also done in terms of the Mughal date instead of using Hindu mode of dating, because that was part of the cultural ethos of Kishangarh. Like Kishangarh, Bikaner was also an offshoot of the Rathod state of Marwar, as we have discussed. By 1700, Bikaner artists were producing works fully as elegant and sophisticated as any Mughal painting. Precision of craftsmanship was expressively important, and the scenes continually evoked the worldly atmosphere of the Rajput court. Even Krishna was painted wearing jewellery and the finest silks. Apart from the Mughal influence, its color schemes of green, silver and lilac betrays a taste deeply affected by the painting in the Deccan, especially the herons, and the extremely refinement of the plains, folios and the personage portrayed. So Deccani style was also having its influence on these paintings. This Deccani link is hardly surprising, of course, because Anup Singh of Bikaner served under the Mughals at Aurangabad, Bijapur and Golconda, and must have carried certain artists or news artists working in these areas with this particular Deccani style, and he must have carried some along with him to his own state. And it was for his bravery that Golconda, we know in 1687, that his rank was raised up to Maharaja. Bikaner rulers continued to defend imperial policies in the Deccan, and therefore they were the last ranks with whom the Mughals were keeping a tie through the early decades of 18th century. In the words of Milo Bitch, we can say therefore that political power of importance was no guarantee of the originality or vitality of a local style of painting. Artistic excellence was instead completely the result of personal interest, of a persona, of a patron, of the availability of good to the artist, and of the chemistry between the painter and the patron, often combined with the strength of a continuing local tradition. So when we have to understand Rajput painting, we have to understand what the patron wanted, what kind of an artist was working with the patron, the proximity of the local school with the Mughal school, and of course its interest in expenditure in painting. Therefore, to summarize this module, we can say linear stylistic development in the Rajput schools that was basic to the Mughal school from the 16th century to the time of Aurangzeb. So because these schools were not planned schools like the Mughal, and the patrons used it for their own pleasure and fancy only. The changes in the Rajput style thus is not always as significant as its Mughal counterpart, and they are less the product of conscious choice and individual initiative. The other point which is very necessary to understand is that the major stylistic change within the Rajput tradition is not necessarily the result of conscious artistic initiative. Here the tradition of artistic fulfillment comes first from the faithful performance and secondarily from the invention. Thus, we have discussed how the painting styles, as we know of the Rajputs, developed and evolved. Please log on to EPG Pathshala website for further information and the text given to it. Thank you for your patient listening. Thank you.